and good evening, the internet. How are you doing? Today is Buddhism. Buddhism is good and fun and interesting, although also quite boring. So I'll just do the fun bits. Last time we looked at Hinduism and the idea of Hinduism reincarnation, we looked at Atman and we looked at rebirth. A lot of the ideas in Buddhism are exactly the same as they are in Hinduism. It's an interesting thing. Well, the Buddha was a Hindu to begin with, so it's obvious. So a lot of the terms that we came across in Hinduism reoccur in Buddhism. So the first of these is karma. The idea of karma in Buddhism is very similar to that in Hinduism. That's the first thing we're going to look at. Samsara, it comes up in Buddhism. Rebirth is another of the things. I have a list down here. Atman, we're going to look at the idea of Atman and Anatman and the difference between those two concepts, and also the idea of dualism and monism in terms of spirit and body, of flesh and soul, of physical and spiritual. And that is today. Let's go. So in Hinduism, we have this idea that you go around the whole supermarket and you collect all this stuff, good and bad, and you cash it in at the end, and that's karma. If you don't remember, watch the last video. In Buddhism, karma is much more immediate. So if you do good things will happen to you. When people talk about karma in the West, we talk about karma will get that person. It's much more a Buddhist notion, although still quite inaccurate. Really what the Buddha meant was that if you make the world a better place, the world will be a better place, and you're the one who's got to live in it, so that's a good thing, right? Good. If you do good things will happen to you, because if you do good things, people will want to do good things to you. It's really immediate. It's not particularly magical or spiritual. It really is just a common sense. And the Buddha, very importantly, the Buddha said that his way of doing things and his way of thinking about the world was not the only way. He said this is one way to enlightenment. This is not the only way to enlightenment. There are loads of ways. And even now, you get different kinds of Buddhists. The Mahayana Buddhists, the greater vehicle to enlightenment, and Theravada, which is the lesser vehicle, but it's called that by Mahayana Buddhists, obviously. But the Buddha was he was chill. He was just do what you want to do. If you want to do this, you can do this. If you don't want to do this, do something else. It's all good. I'm just telling you how I got my enlightenment, which is nice. It's a take it or leave it kind of religion. Karma in Buddhism is an immediate, if you do some bad stuff, you're going to create a worse world, and it's going to be a worse place to live in. So you're better off not. So if you act in anger, if you refuse to forgive, if you don't act with love, then you're going to create a world which is angry and unforgiving and unloving, and that's not going to be a fun place to live in, now is it? In Hinduism, we have this idea of samsara as an afterlife kind of thing, where your soul gets out of your body and is reborn into something else. Now in Buddhism, samsara is much more immediate. The wheel of samsara in Buddhism is also called the wheel of life. It's worth looking up a picture of it. I can put a slide of a picture. Here's a picture of the wheel of life. So you'll see that there are 6 realms. Now these are not meant to be metaphysical or supernatural. These are modes of being in the world that people actually live with. If you do bad things and you're angry and you are greedy and you live by your desires, then you're going to have a really rubbish life, because as much as you have, you're always going to want more. So the Buddha's whole point was release yourself from desire. Don't have any desires. Just chill. Just have what you have. The Buddha was trying to find enlightenment for ages, right? And one of the things that he did was he tried to be an ascetic, right? A-S-C-E-T. I can just write it. Ascetic. It says it here. He tried to be an ascetic for a while, and he lived on 1 grain of rice per day for, a year. And didn't work for him. He was just really hungry, and it took his mind off enlightenment. It took his mind off what was going on, so it wasn't helpful. And he'd lived as a prince before that, when he was still Siddhartha Gautama, before he had enlightenment. He had loads of rice all the time, and women and chicken, whatever princes had. He had all that, and it didn't help him either. So he came up with this whole idea of the middle way. So desire causes suffering. That's the whole point. That's Buddhism. That's Buddhism. Is that desire causes your suffering. In Hinduism, we have this idea of the single individual eternal soul that resides within us and is reincarnated after the death of this body, right? In Buddhism, the Buddha wanted to get rid of this whole notion of Atman. So he had instead this concept of Anatman. There is no soul. There is no self. The idea of self is an illusion because the self is the source of this idea of craving and desire. Once you've got rid of the notion that there's a self to fulfill, you can release yourself from the notion that desire is something worth giving into. In philosophy, when we talk about dualism, we talk about the physical, the material, like the phenomenal world, stuff around us that we can touch and feel and experience, and the spiritual or the noumenal or metaphysical, I guess, stuff that's outside of the realm of experience. So dualism means that we have a split between these two. The Hindu is a dualist, right? We have the body, it does exist, it's a shell, and inside is Atman, which is part of Brahman, and that is the spiritual. So we have the spiritual and the physical. Unlike a physical monism, which is what most atheists believe, like we are just, everything is physical, the laws of physics are the laws of the world, and that's all there is. Buddhists have a spiritual monism, so all that there is spirituality, because everything, all of the things that you see and experience, they're all illusions. Your body's an illusion, your self is an illusion, and you get sucked into it, into thinking that like sating your hunger is going to be sating yourself. And actually you've got to realise there is no hunger, there is no self. You do what you've got to do because you're bound to this illusion. But actually, if you meditate and think about it enough, you'll realise there is no self in the first place. And the way to reach enlightenment is to be released. Nirvana, enlightenment, in Buddhism, it means to be snuffed out like a candle. And there's no real way of explaining it because we don't have any concepts left, because once we are gone, that subjective from where we can talk about things, where we can form propositions about their relations to us, that disappears. There is no us, so there are no words left to talk about us. So Nirvana is an ending, but it's not an ending because there wasn't anything ever to end. So we find ourselves lost in semantics, snuffed out. Siddhartha Gautama was a prince. He lived in a palace, he had all princely stuff, he had a wife, he had a kid. There was a prophecy that he was either going to be a great leader or a great spiritual man. And there's a whole bunch of stories about that, you can look them up. You remember Jasmine in Aladdin? It's a lot like that. So he'd never seen outside the palace, he'd been protected from everything by his dad. One day he escapes from the palace and he wanders through the streets and he gets his coachman, who has a name that I don't remember. He gets his coachman, right, and goes through the streets and experiences things he's never seen before, which is really important because he sees the four sides. That's the first thing. Buddhism is all lists. So he sees old age. He's never really seen old people before, and he looks at how the body becomes all decrepit and withered and how age affects people. That's a big deal for an adult to see for the first time. He sees illness, sickness, people who are suffering with diseases, and he's never really seen this before. He's certainly never had an illness before. He sees death. He sees a dead person, and he doesn't know that death is a thing that can happen. Like, that's a lot to take on as an adult. And the fourth sight is the holy man. He sees an ascetic. He sees a man who has dedicated his life to reaching enlightenment, a Hindu, presumably. And these four sights change the Buddha forever. He abandons his life, he abandons his family, he goes off looking for enlightenment, looking for an answer. Why do we suffer? So first he tries asceticism. He joins some ascetics and he lives this life. He has 1 grain of rice a day and he doesn't really get him anywhere. So he leaves the ascetics, goes off on his own. He sits under the Bodhi tree. He sits under this tree, which is still there, theoretically. He sits and he says, right, that's it, world. I'm not moving until I'm enlightened. And as he sits under the tree and meditates, he empties his mind of all thought. And then, a moment, he realizes, and in that moment, puts his hand to the ground so that the earth can witness his enlightenment. What he realizes are the three universal truths. Anatta. There is no self. There is no self. 2. Anicca. Everything changes. Everything is in a constant state of flux, and we want things to be other than they are, and they keep changing, and everything constantly changes. And the third is dukkha. Everything is suffering. Life is suffering. All beings suffer, and all being is suffering in some way, because we yearn to be what we're not, and we yearn to be something at all, and combined with anicca, that can't happen, because we cannot be, we're always changing. These three universal truths are what the Buddha realized in his enlightenment. And what that leads us to quite nicely is the 4 noble truths. The first of them is dukkha, is that everything is suffering. And then tanha. Tanha is the thirst, right? That suffering is caused by your desire. Nirodha, that there is a way out. There's a way out of suffering because of our craving. And the way out is the 4th noble truth, magga, which is to follow the Eightfold Path. Right vision, right intention, right concentration, right action, right mindfulness, right effort, right livelihood, and right speech. All of these things we could go into in a lot of depth, but really what they mean is you should live a good life, that you shouldn't do bad things to anybody else, and all together, just bundled together, what the Buddha said is love. One important story about the Buddha is this. If you've been shot in the arm by an arrow, why would you spend your life questioning where the arrow has come from and who shot it, what kind of being they are, and what kind of instrument they shot it from? Your concern is, get this arrow out of my arm! Owie, owie, so I'm bleeding. It really hurts. And that is why Buddhism is both fascinating and very dull for me as a philosopher. The Buddha really tries to address the day-to-day, everyday suffering of mankind, what we have to deal with and the problems that we have. However, he does say there's no point asking questions about creation, about God, about like the nature of evil metaphysically. That stuff doesn't matter. What matters is that I am suffering right now. How can I stop it? According to the Buddha, and here's the summing up, that my life is constantly changing. This causes me to suffer because I want things to be other than they are, right? And I want things to be a certain way so that I can get some hook, so that I can desire properly, so that I can fulfill and my craving for things I want all the time, right? I'm never in a state when I don't need something, when I don't want something. But the Buddha said that the answer is to realize that your suffering is caused by your desire. So you need to let go of that desire. And that there is no self to be fulfilled. You have to let go of this idea of the self. If you're suffering, the Buddha says, let it go. Just love. And that's the answer. So this was supposed to be a video about the nature of God, but there is no God in Buddhism. Some Buddhists will say that God is within you, and in a way you are God of your own dominion because you decide what the world is to you. If you feel like you need the newest iPhone, you need a new TV, you need a new camera, you need stuff to make you happy, you will never be happy because you will never have enough. Let go. Really? You don't need anything. Because there is no you and there is no stuff. You will never be happy by wanting more and getting more. You have to let go of the idea that you need anything and let go of the idea that the stuff around will be what you need. So, as an atheistic religion, but a religion nonetheless, they have their rituals, There is no God in Buddhism per se, but it's still a really important message about the way that we should live our lives, and the way to avoid suffering, and the way to get past our craving and desire for materialism. That is the end of Buddhism, and next we have Sikhism. I'm going to crack out a bunch of videos this weekend, so watch out for Sikhism and some GCSE revision. Woohoo! Thank you very much, good night. Totally killed that bug. That was very inappropriate for a video on Buddhism.